How many of you have ever tried to squeeze a camel through the eye of a needle? It would be an impossible task. And Jesus said this particular kind of task would be just as impossible as trying to get a rich man into heaven. And in fact, he said this in Mark 10, and it's verses 17 to 25. A rich man had approached Jesus and he wanted to know what he could do to go to heaven. And he realized that all of his deeds were pretty good. He had been being very, he's been generous in certain ways. He honored his parents. He didn't bear false witness. He was following the 10 Commandments. But then what really disheartened him after he said, Teacher, all these I have kept from my youth. What really disheartened him is that Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, You lack one thing. Go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. Disheartened by the saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And so what did Jesus say? He said, Children, how difficult it is to enter the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person, to enter the kingdom of heaven. So he says it's very difficult, but it's not impossible. There's many examples of wealthy people who are in the Bible. Of course, you've got the biggest one, King Solomon. King Solomon had amassed a great amount of wealth. But of course, then he lamented his situation in Ecclesiastes when he realized he'd been given everything. And then he realized everything's meaningless. Wisdom's meaningless, knowledge, possessions, all of it's meaningless. God is the only thing that adds meaning. And so King Solomon said that. We also have examples like Abraham, King David, and then we even have a couple of rich women like Lydia and Phoebe, who helped to fund Paul's missionary status, along with other trips with other early Christian disciples. And so there are examples of people with money in the Bible. So it's not impossible for these people. So what forms the difference? What makes it so that, say, if you go to CEO David Green of the Hobby Lobby, which is worth billions, so you go into the Hobby Lobby worth billions of dollars. He is a Christian. He talks about being a Christian, and the whole company is founded on Christian principles. What differentiates him from someone like Elon Musk or from others like Jeff Bezos or Bernard Arnault? He's the Louis Vuitton founder, or Louis Vuitton CEO, I should say, or Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. There are a bunch of billionaires occupying high-level positions here in the world. How are they going to get to heaven? Is it even possible? And so the other question is we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about what Jesus said it would take. We're going to talk about Jesus's work ethic. I've heard people accuse him of being a socialist, but he's far from it. If you look at the parable of the talents, you can see it's obvious. He wants you to maximize your talents, to take all of this, the gifts that God has given you, to use them well. And then he wants you to give back. So if you have money, he wants you then to be very generous with people who don't, people who are trying hard, people who are disabled, maybe in impoverished circumstances. He wants you to do as well as you can, but then not to turn a blind eye to the people around you who are struggling and suffering. So before I start here, I want to say hi to Susan and hi to Keith Colvin in the chat. Great to see you guys. So we're going to listen to this very interesting commentary between the Babylon Bee people and Elon Musk, because I think they kind of caught him off guard when they said suddenly to him, do me a solid. It was kind of funny watching his reaction. So you might ask yourself, who is Elon Musk? Well, Elon Musk is somebody who has been capitalizing on his assets. Very smart man, very intelligent, very insightful, creative, entrepreneurial, innovative. He's got all of those kind of features of a businessman who's going to succeed in the United States, or really in many places of the world. And so he is currently the CEO and founder of SpaceX. He's the CEO of Tesla. He was born in Pretoria, South Africa, but he ended up over at the University of Pennsylvania before starting out in Stanford in California, and then leaving that to form a company with his brother that was called Zip2. Zip2 is a software company. He ended up selling that for $307 million in 1999 to Compaq. And so you can see where he got his millions came in before we even turned the century. And so then he's into what he's doing today. And estimates I've seen show he's worth upwards of almost $300 billion. The man is worth more money than he can possibly spend ever in his lifetime. And so the question is, what does that do to you? Does that blind you? Does that make you, if you've got this material wealth like that, is it even possible to be a spiritual person with such material wealth? Do we have examples of that? Well, before we get into that, let's listen to what is said here in the Babylon Bee, because I found the situation pretty interesting. Yeah, and he is incredibly lucky, Kip. But I can also say, just coming from a business background and being a business professor, luck plays a role, but it's not the only thing. There's a lot of other circumstances that play in there, including your own intuition about what would be a good business proposition, your ability to recognize opportunities, etc. There's a whole bunch of situations that play into why someone succeeds and why somebody doesn't. And the other thing is Elon Musk works very hard. And if it weren't for Elon Musk, there'd be a lot of unemployed people who are now working at Tesla and SpaceX and other organizations that he has an interest in. So here we go. Let's listen to what this interview said. I'm just going to capture this portion of the interview because I found this kind of interesting. So let's listen in.
This is church. So to make this church, we have to make sure. We're wondering if you could do us a quick solid and accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
On the show.
Personal Lord and Savior. It's a quick prayer.
So previously, when we were using spreadsheets, we were heavily meeting dependent.
So we'll stop
it took us
there.
hours
1 second.
to.
Okay. Got an ad right there.
I mean, let's just say, I agree with the principles that Jesus advocated.
Very good answer. He agreed with the principles Jesus advocated. This is trying to diffuse a rather uncomfortable situation. And I can tell you how this feels because I was sort of in a similar situation. I hadn't looked into the evidence of Jesus's resurrection. And I found myself sitting next to a pastor on a plane who asked me point blank, do I believe in Jesus Christ, that he's my Lord and Savior? And I was kind of stumbling over my words because I hadn't even looked at the information surrounding the resurrection. I hadn't paid much attention to Jesus at all. I had at that point started to find my way into the church, and I really enjoyed the music and I enjoyed the message, but I really still had not fully examined Jesus and accepted it into my heart as my Lord and Savior. So I did that not too long after that pastor opened my eyes to C.S. Lewis. But I digress. Let's see what he does here, because I understand the uncomfortable situation here. I see my brothers in the exact same situation. When I ask them similar questions, they feel really squirmy. So let's see what happens here.
And there's great wisdom in the teachings of Jesus.
See, he's also
he lives in Austin.
Oh, you live in Austin, okay.
Yeah.
Oops, how did this
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, somehow this got scooped ahead. So let me come back to where we were.
Relatively socialist. And yet the GDP per capita of West Germany was, I think, 5 times higher than East Germany. So that just shows you just how big.
Okay, that's actually a good comment. I would like to probably get into that too, but I just lost my place here, which is where I was a second ago, and I'm not sure exactly where that was in time.
Times, roughly. Some people are online are going to argue with this, but it's the input is many orders of magnitude higher than output because of.
Okay, so I'm going to take a quick zip around here just to find exactly where I was a second ago because I lost my spot. So excuse that. While I'm doing that, I want to say hi to the chat. So let me get back to my spot. Here we are. Okay, 94 minutes in, hour 34. Okay, so let's just go back and listen to this again. So no, I have not seen the critique of this interview by Paul Vanderklay. I want to say hi to Susan, hi to Stephen Rivard. Great to see you guys. Kip Davis, the Babylon Bee is so cool for blindsiding Elon Musk. What can you expect if you sit down with a couple of guys who are trying to do a ministry? They do it in a funny way. I mean, Babylon Bee is a satire, but you got to expect they're going to probably try to do something to get some hits to the channel. And they have. Look at this. It's got 2 million views. So let's look at this again.
If you could do us a quick solid and accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
On the show.
He looks like the deer in the headlights, just to point that out. So I'm going to let him say what he has to say. Here we go. Oh, also hi to Gorgeous Roddy Chrome and to anyone else who's in here. So thank you guys for coming by.
Personal Lord and Savior. It's a quick prayer.
The sad part about this thing is when you're coming in from the Western perspective, we are unfortunately in the midst and in the rubble of Christianity. And I can say in the rubble because we're serving in the fumes of Christianity. A lot of people have moved away from Christian beliefs. There's a lot of atheism and agnosticism springing up around. A lot of children, young kids, are identifying now as nuns here in the West. And one of the reasons is because we're a very wealthy society, relatively speaking. If you go back to the early 1800s, in fact, in 1800, over 80% of the world's population was surviving on less than $1.90 a day, the equivalent of $1.90 a day. Today, you have a much smaller portion of people who are impoverished. Places like the United States, our median household income, according to the Census Bureau, is $62,000 a year. That's household. So that includes, say, if it's two-parent household, two parents, their income. But median per capita is $34,000 a year, which you can live on, you can afford, especially if you live in places like Lake Wales, Florida, that has a very easy to get over there and live in a little trailer park for not too much money at all. But anyway, I digress. So the point is that there's a lot of wealth here in the United States, and sadly, wealth sort of blinds people's eyes to what's really important. I can also say this coming from Boca Raton, Florida. Boca Raton is a very wealthy town in Florida, very wealthy. And it's the homes range quite huge, like homes range in a crazy way. But in the last year, I've noticed homes that traditionally were $300,000, $400,000 just even 10 years ago are suddenly up to $750,000, $800,000. I know people very well whose homes have soared over $1 million right now in Boca Raton. It's the real estate market has boomed there, and it's because people are fleeing places like New York City and California to come to the red state because they don't want to be shackled down by the restrictions that some places have. But anyway, I'm digressing. So here we go. Oh, so Paul thought the Babylon Bee lost a good chance to have a great interview. It was like editors themselves did not take Christianity seriously. Yeah, they're kind of laughing here. So let's see what we have here.
I mean, let's just say, like, I agree with the principles that Jesus advocated, and that there's great wisdom in the teachings of Jesus, and I agree with those teachings.
And I think that's a very wise move, and I think that we all agree with those at heart. At heart, if you go around the world and you look at the values that guide people, and you can go around to multiple global studies and you can find that benevolence, for example, from Shalom Schwartz, and also in places like the Globe Study, is highly rated. In the Globe Study, humane orientation is a value that everyone in every country, I mean, all the people surveyed at the country level, realize that humane orientation is something countries ought to strive for. Humane orientation is a combination of being good to your neighbor, being good to your family, your friends, your in-group, but also being good to the planet around us and animals and plant life and all that kind of stuff. So that is the humane orientation idea. And you can see that that's something that's important to the whole world, but it wasn't always like that. Go back to the way that people did not value humans back during the gladiator times, and go back to other places in our past where people were really treating humans on a low level. Women were given second-class status. There were a lot of slaves, a lot of terrible situations going on before Jesus came, and he turned the world upside down. He said shocking things. Prior to Jesus, people thought that if you were poor, you were cursed. And if you were wealthy, you were blessed. The gods loved you. That's what they thought. Jesus said something on the Beatitudes. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are suffering on his account. He said a lot of things that made a lot of sense and tapped into what was really important into our conscience, which God has made us well aware. And so that is a pretty cool thing. And I think Elon Musk understands that, as do most people. Most people, unless they've seared their conscience, understand the importance of helping people who are less advantaged than you are, and reaching out to people and realizing that if you're here in the United States, you pretty much won the lotto in life compared to where you could have been born in the world. There's some places that would be just downright egregious to be born into. Imagine if you had been born into North Korea, for example. It'd be a horrific situation. Everyone's worshiping Kim Jong-un as if he's a god. But let's get into this and keep going.
And things like Tony the Cheek are very important, because as opposed to an eye for an eye, an eye for.
And actually what he's pointing out is something really important. In the Old Testament, Jesus corrected he built upon some of the information from the Old Testament. He said, you have heard it said this, but I tell you that. Okay, so it's kind of the idea. You've heard eye for an eye, but I tell you to turn the other cheek. I tell you to forgive your enemy 70 times 7. Keep forgiving them, keep forgiving them. And of course, the model with 70 is the look in the special number 7, which is a fullness of forgiveness.
For an eye leads everyone blind. So forgiveness, is important, and treating people as you would wish to be treated. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Very important.
So it's like a 60, 70%. Yes.
As Einstein would say, I believe in the God of Spinoza. But hey, if Jesus is saving people, I mean, I wouldn't stand in his way,
Well, you wouldn't have a choice. That's the one problem with being that wealthy, is sometimes you feel that you're given in this powerful position, as he is. He's one of the most powerful people in the world right now, certainly one of the wealthiest. And he's right up there. He's right up there with Jeff Bezos as some of the wealthiest people in the world who have tremendous power. But it's worldly power. And it's interesting when you realize what's really important in the end has nothing to do with any materials you've acquired. You look at somebody on their deathbed. I look at right now, for example, literally today, within the next few days, my parents, after 55 years of marriage, are going to have to separate in a way, because very soon, in the next few days, my mom's going to have to be put into a care facility, because it's impossible for my dad to lift her and to do things like that. And so it's just what happens when you get into old age, and you just realize the value of those relationships and the memories that you have accumulated over all that time. And that's just something. Here we go.
I'll be sure. I'll be safe. Why not?
Sweet. We did it.
Yeah.
I think he just said yes.
We got him.
All right.
We got him.
Sounds good.
You want to get baptized or anything real quick?
I was baptized.
Oh, okay.
Anglican.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's done.
He was baptized, he said. So at least he was raised probably as a Christian. I don't know anything about his upbringing, but it's one of the things that Jesus did is there was an old covenant and there was a new covenant. And people sometimes get that a little bit confused. But if you go back, and you're going to realize the old covenant was under Mosaic law, and people were living in a theocracy back then, when God was the leader who was appointing the kings of Israel through the history of Israel. And then you get to the culmination, Jesus arriving on the earth, the kingdom coming to the earth, the kingdom coming from heaven down to the earth, and fulfilling everything that had been foretold through the prophets for thousands of years. And as he came down, he also realized that the new covenant was going to consist of the types of messages that people needed to hear at that point and forward. And the new covenant, instead of summarizing all of the 10 commandments, for example, it said 2 simple commandments: love the Lord above all else and love your neighbors as yourself. That summarized everything else. We also realized that Jesus, as the Sabbath, fulfilled the Sabbath. So that was another very important thing that happened in the new covenant. And then, of course, he set out to let us know the one thing that can get us to Jesus: faith in Jesus. Okay? It's not the works you do. That's what differentiates Christianity from all of these other world religions. It's not the work that we did, it's the work that he did for us. And so all we have to do is accept the work that he did for us. He did a lot of work for us. He went to, carried the cross for us, was crucified, died and was buried for us, rose on the 3rd day for us. And then he went and he worked through people like Peter and Paul to spread the word around the entire kingdom. I've been focusing a lot on Paul lately and Paul's message, and it's really fascinating to see where Paul came from. If you realize, Paul, again, was on the road to Damascus. And several times in the book of Acts, Luke recounts how Jesus stopped him on the road to Damascus, and Paul saw a great light and heard a voice. And then he was blinded. Now, some people have used that to say, oh, well, Paul never actually saw Jesus. Well, of course, they haven't read Acts 23:11, where Jesus stood by Paul and comforted him and let him know that he was doing the right thing. Paul, after he was struck down, he spent 9 years still working as a tent maker for his father. And then he started the ministry, and he started traveling with Barnabas and Silas. And we've got Priscilla, Aquila, Phoebe, Lydia, all kinds of people are involved in the ministry of Paul. Even John Mark, who was Barnabas's cousin, he also started off with Paul, and then he left early. And then Paul and Barnabas got into an argument over how to continue the ministry. Paul went on with Silas one way, And Barnabas took his cousin John Mark, gave him another chance because John Mark had quit before, and they went another way. So God figured out a way to split the two into two different ministries, move forward, positive ways. And eventually John Mark and Paul reconciled, and Paul later in his books recognized what an important person John Mark was. I was looking a little bit into the pastoral accounts, the 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus. And if you haven't read those really closely, it's interesting because instead of being written to a group like Colossians and Ephesians and Galatians and Corinthians, these are written to single people. And they're written to people who are starting a ministry. And it's called the pastoral accounts because they're telling them how to be a good pastor, how to select good pastors, and the kind of qualities that they would need to guide them forward, and the kind of people they would need to be. And this can speak to the value of the kind of person that Jesus wants all of us to be in a way. Wants us to be good people who do what is right in his eyes. And that, of course, is doing well in the eyes of others as well, as far as not doing well, but doing well in the eyes of a Christian, being good to others, being generous, being honest, being true, all those kind of things. But anyway, so they kind of split out. And by the 2 Timothy, you can see a lot of times Jesus is appearing to Paul. He also appears to him when he's about to be shipwrecked, all this kind of stuff. And then we get the 2 Timothy that Paul realizes, I've finished the race. I've done everything that I've been called to do. And now he's ready. He realized that he could keep going on in the ministry and he could keep suffering because he realized part of being a Christian is to suffer. There is suffering involved as a Christian. Or he realized it would be easier in some ways to just go to heaven with Jesus. And he realized that Jesus was calling him at that point. And as you probably know from history, that's about the time in the year 62 to 64, somewhere around there, when Nero had him beheaded. And he had raced the good race, done all the good things. But let's keep going here and see what else Elon Musk has to say following up on this conversation.
They dunked me in the water when I was just a baby.
Cool.
This is like
Second?
Yeah. I even had the whatever blood and body of Christ, which was kind of weird, if you're a little kid, like you get to give you some weird tasting, biscuit and wine. Yeah. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, isn't this kind of
just cut it off when he said yes?
I'm like, is this some fading weird metaphor for cannibalism or something?
See, he doesn't, that's the sad thing about when you don't take any time to investigate the Christian religion, you look at it from an outsider's perspective. And unfortunately, just as it said in the Gospels, people are going to think that some of our beliefs are strange. Even during Jesus's ministry, when he said, you will drink of my blood and eat of my body, people were like, oh my gosh, what is that? What is he talking about? Some people believe that the host that is used in communion is actually some sort of a figure of Jesus. It's actually part of Jesus. That's the transubstantiation that the Catholics believe. But many other people don't believe quite that. But what we do believe is it's representative of Jesus' body and Jesus' blood. And all that's saying is that we're accepting him fully as our Savior. He's going to be our nourishment. And that's really what this says with communion. The idea of taking communion when you don't fully understand that, unfortunately, is something that even I did as a Catholic as a little kid. We're not really given a great education at the age of 7. I was in 2nd grade. That's when Catholics traditionally go and accept their first communion. We're not given the best information about exactly what that means, what it all represents. And so as we go on, we also realize the Catholics and the Lutherans, and I had my sons baptized when they were infants, and the Catholics do too. We have our kids baptized as infants going back years and years and years, because what happened through the centuries is people would worry that if they didn't have their kids baptized, their kids had no chance of going to heaven. So they thought they would have them baptized pretty much immediately, really soon after you're born, you'd be christened, and because it would protect you in a way. But as I got older and as I started going to a Baptist church, I came to the knowledge that actually it's better for you yourself to choose Jesus and to be baptized in that way. So I was baptized for a second time. I was born again, you could call it. So I want to say hi to, and I hate to say that, Titan, and then Titan out there, and Kip Davis, and Susan, and Keith Colvin. So yeah, we've got a lot of, I don't know what the conversation is here. It looks like it might be on socialism. Oh, well, let me just add into that for a second, because I happen to be somewhat knowledgeable of that. So Kip Davis says, 21st century European socialism is not remotely anything like Cold War communism. How incredibly naive of you to make such a pointless comparison. Just so you understand the distinction, there is no country in the world that's fully communist or fully socialist. Every country has a little bit of free market. Okay, every country has some combination. The issue is the percentage of socialist government-owned means of production versus people-owned means of production. The typical socialist idea is it's supposed to be the people own the means of production. Communism says the government owns and controls the means of production. In the USSR failed tremendously because the government owned the means of production. And so what they started doing is they squeezed out the innovativeness and the entrepreneurial capacities. And they even eliminated a lot of the middle income and upper level people who were making money in their economies. They wanted everybody to be paupers. And eventually that's what they got. Everybody was a pauper. You would be arrested and thrown into the clink in USSR if you were a farmer and you were using some of your own produce to feed your kids. You were not allowed to do that. Everything that you produced was supposed to be shipped into the cities. If you want more details on that, see Alexander Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag Archipelago. It was a complete disaster. Now, to extend that over, before I go to Europe, let me first swing down over to Venezuela. In the late 90s, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in South America, thriving unbelievably well. I was there in 1996. I was on a cruise ship. I think it was 96, 97, something like that. It was thriving then. They had a little bit of crime, so they told us to leave our jewelry on the cruise ship, but it was thriving. I saw the Murano glass factory. I saw La Guaira, Venezuela, nice place right there on the water, beautiful. However, Chavez came into office and kind of initially got in there a little squirmy way. And he appealed to people like Sean Penn and Bernie Sanders, who are notorious socialists. And at first, what his message was sounded appealing. He said, we're going to lower gas prices to something like 2 cents a gallon. We're going to subsidize that. We're going to subsidize food. We're going to do all that kind of stuff. And starting around 2007, 2008, he started taking over a lot of industries. Okay. He took his goons and he went into one place that was running the oil. I forgot the name of the company, some petrol company, had control of the oil industry. And he fired all the people in that company, over 20,000, and he replaced them with his own government people who had completely no knowledge of how to run it. Well, instead what they did was they ran it into the ground. He did the exact same thing with a transportation company, shipping company, and a number of other companies in different industries. He controlled the media. He did all sorts of things. They started saying to people, if you're producing products, that you were not allowed to produce products and sell them at a rate above what he considered fair. But oftentimes, the problem was when you have this government intervention and the government telling you what you can do and what your price controls are, what happened was eventually he squeezed out the merchants. And right now in Venezuela, the average person has lost 20 pounds. They're starving. Over 90% of them are highly impoverished. Many people are dying of starvation. It's a complete disaster. Suddenly, Bernie Sanders and Sean Penn don't pay any more attention to Venezuela, pretending that that was not something they ever supported. However, yes, they did. They were down there, raising up the idea like it was wonderful. Now let's segue over into Europe. In Europe, the places that are considered the socialist democracies typically are places like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany. Those are a few examples of what they would probably call more socialist countries. The idea is cradle to grave. You're being taken care of by the government. So rather than outsource your production and things like that in things like healthcare, education, that kind of stuff, instead of outsourcing that to private industry, and I'll quick segue on the education thing in a second, but instead of outsourcing that, they say, we're going to take care of you from the minute you're born. The daycares are going to take care of you. The schools will take care of you. So long as you get accepted into a college and you choose a major we believe is appropriate, we'll go ahead and pay for your college tuition. Those sorts of things are funded by the government. And some people love that. And they love the universal health care. But it doesn't come with low taxes. Don't be fooled. If you're making 60 grand, the equivalent of the United States dollar, 60 grand in Sweden, your income tax level is 60%. If you're in Denmark and you want to buy a car, the tax that you're going to pay on that is 100%. So if I buy a car for $30,000, it's going to cost me another $30,000. It used to be 200%. So the taxes are incredibly high, even for the middle class. And so that's something you're going to deal with. You do get universal health care. However, they don't claim that it's healthcare on the level of United States healthcare. I don't say our healthcare is perfect, and I do endorse universal healthcare. I would like to see somehow we get something like that over here in the United States. But comparing us to those three countries, places like that do not consider themselves socialist, by the way. The Denmark president corrected Bernie Sanders on that. They don't consider themselves socialist, but comparing us to those countries is like comparing, we have 331 million people. Sweden has 10 million. Norway has 5 million. You can't compare apples to oranges. They're not even the size of Florida, which has 21 million people. So it's hard to try to translate policies from one place like that to another. Germany's bigger. Germany has about 80 million people, but I digress. Anyway, so Kip Davis, I am part Norwegian. That's my heritage. I've got family from different parts of Norway. And one of the things that Norwegians, now again, this is 5 million people, a quarter the size of the state of Florida. Same amount as Ireland. Ireland also has 5 million people. Teeny little place, teeny little country. But they have benefited because they had a very smart government that invested money in a fund, a sovereign fund, and they've been able to give back money to the people. It's a very good deal to live in Norway. It's very expensive, but it's a very good deal. And part of that is their interest in oil, and they've done quite well offshore. But anyway, so let's see here what else we have. Let's go back and see what else. Keith Colvin says, same with the Weather Channel, taken over by liberals. Oh, that brings me back to the education. In the United States, I tend to believe we have very good school system. And I'm taking advantage of the A schools in my neighborhood. The public schools hasn't cost me a dime. It's been beautiful. I think my kids are getting a tremendous education, and I'm a big fan of it. However, I have listened to Thomas Sowell and a lot of his information on charter schools and how those can benefit people, especially in those impoverished places where the public schools aren't so hot. And so I would advise considering a charter school if you're in a place that you're in, say, a C or a D or an F grade public education schooling system. And so that's just one thing I wanted to add right there. Okay. And as far as community colleges, I also have never said it's a bad idea for kids who are maybe struggling in high school, either financially, parents are struggling, or they're struggling academically. I think the community college forms a beautiful bridge between high school and a university, a bigger university. And in fact, in Florida, if you graduate from one of our community colleges, you're given automatic entrance into our major universities. So if you want to go the more inexpensive way, stay home, go to community college for a couple of years, get your associate's degree, and then go off to, say, University of Florida or Florida State or somewhere like that, and you'll get accepted. You spend 2 more years and you got a graduate degree. an undergraduate degree from a prestigious university. So I'm digressing. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Whoops.
I don't get it. Like, what the hell? I remember thinking that was just crazy when I was a kid.
It's kind of sad because you would have this moment I know they're trying to kind of chum up to Elon Musk, but this could also be a moment where you actually explain to him what all of this means. And hopefully at some point in his life, Elon Musk will get to the point where he wants to find the greater truth and the greater purpose of how we exist and why we exist. But at this point, it doesn't look like he's there. He's sort of living large, obviously.
And I'm like, whoa, I mean, even as a metaphor, it's kind of odd,
Yeah,
so it is. It's like, and should he be giving alcohol to minors? I was like,
we do grape juice. We're bad.
okay.
Yes.
I think it's unusual to even be thinking about that as a kid. Like as a kid, you just go through the motions, and then it's
Right.
later on that you think, wait a minute, what does this
weird.
actually represent?
I think that's actually kind of it's further from the truth than it really is. If you guys think about your own experiences, when I was little, especially when I was about 6th grade, I was constantly thinking about God, and I wanted to know more and more and more. I was very, very curious, and my spiritual light was awakened by C.S. Lewis and his children's books. I read those in 5th grade. I remember smuggling those into the classroom, and while the nun was teaching, I had the book under another book, and I was pretending I was listening, but I was really reading my C.S. Lewis, which is pretty ridiculous, but that's what I did. I loved the C.S. Lewis books, and they really opened my eyes. But then I was spiritually sort of dimmed right after college in my 20s. I just sort of fell away and floundered about for a long time, very long time, until I finally found my way back. And that's when I found myself sitting next to that pastor that I opened up with. So, hey, evidence and reason. Hey, you guys, I could open this up. I haven't had an open room in a while. I don't know if anyone's interested, but I think I'll throw a link. I've been working on 3 different studies, and so I really need to get my academic studies out there. These are not studies related to Christianity; they're my work studies. But I was working on 3 different studies. I have a really good one on coaching right now. We were working with hospital workers over the past year, and I collected reflection papers from them, and it's just wonderful, wonderful stuff. And so I was working on that, and I got a great abstract, and I need to talk to my partner, my colleague that's working with me on that particular project before I move on. And then the other thing I'm working on is a really interesting project on core self-evaluations. And I collected data for my students in this particular case. And what I found was core self-evaluations are a measure of self-confidence and about your confidence in your own abilities and all that kind of stuff. And it also has to do with your locus of control, if you feel like you have control over your situation. It comes out of Tim Judge, who at one point was at the University of Florida when I was particularly studying him. But anyway, so I found in my sample that I think is kind of interesting is males who happen to be white have higher levels of core self-evaluations than non-white females, and there's no interaction. So it's just if you happen to be male, happen to be white. But also I found that if you were in college, now this is for college students, I wanted to see the college student take on this. If you're unemployed, then you had higher core self-evaluations than their employed peers. Now, I'm coming from a private university where I feel like the people who have the advantage in the classroom are probably the ones that don't have to work while they're in college. They have a little bit easier. And maybe that's where they're coming in with a sort of more inflated confidence. But anyway, that's the other study. And then the third study that I'm working on, actually there's more than that, but the third one that I'm working on now is also looking at generational differences in the justifications of various ethical issues, like justifying cheating, lying, stealing. If you're younger, less than 39, you're more likely to justify those practices than if you're older. And one of the theories that's behind that is something that they talk about that has to do with the frequency of those events occurring. So if you feel like you're in an environment where there is more stealing or more cheating, you're more likely to feel that that is morally justifiable. So anyway, I put a link out there in case anyone would like to come in here and join me. I say hi to my friend Sal, who's Evidence and Reasons, and hi to Titan and Keith Colvin and Susan, if she's still there, and Philosophical Logic. That's also a good friend. Yes, I love C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis helped to bring me back to Christianity in a big way. If you haven't read Mere Christianity, please run out there right now and go get it and read it. It's very good stuff. So that's what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to wait and see if anyone wants to come join me here, and we'll play a little bit more of this interview to see what else they say.
Present, what am I doing?
No, when I was a kid, I was like, is this actually blood and body? What?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if I want to eat somebody. And then it was like, what? This is, I mean, I never did it anyway. I'm like, this seems like, okay, man, I don't know if this is just pretty odd, you know?
See, I would hope these guys would take the moment just to open his eyes a little bit, because they're so busy kind of making fun of Christianity and sort of a major component of it, which is the communion, that they're not looking at the bigger picture, which is terribly unfortunate.
I remember thinking,
yeah, and I'm not saying your name, Titan. I'm just saying your half name. I already got caught once saying your full name. Very funny.
that even at age 5. So I was like, you know, and I was definitely like, you know, at Sunday school there, like when they were telling me all the stories, and I was like asking questions, and like, and they really were upset that I was asking questions.
And that's very unfortunate. I can point this out. When I was teaching in Sunday school, I did that for a couple of years. I probably should get back in to do that again. But when I was teaching in Sunday school, when students would ask me questions, I was excited to answer their questions. But I know that some people haven't done the work themselves to look into various aspects of the Bible and the answers to what could be considered tough questions. And it's very sad if a teacher says, hey, don't ask those questions. We don't ask questions around here. You just need to believe blindly. Very, very sad. And so here is Elon Musk, who says he's looking around at the age of 5. I always notice how people who are prodigies, he's a prodigy, but also people who are atheists oftentimes says, when I was 9 years old, I went to church and I realized it's all fake. Really? You're going to make a life decision when you're 9 years old? Doesn't seem like the best move. It looks like at 5, he was making a pretty important decision. So, I see Sal. Hey, Sal.
Hi, how are you? I'm just dropping in to say hi, and it's been a very long
Whoops.
time, so I
I
just
didn't mean to do that. I meant to do this. Yeah, it's been a very long time. How have you been?
I've been hanging in there, and I hope you're well. It's snow and ice here, and I, uh, I I can't remember the last time I was on your show and we had any sort of discussion. I've enjoyed some of your series on the Bible and Jesus prophecy
Oh,
in
thank
the Old
you.
Testament. So thank you for doing that. I got this year. I've gotten published in 2 peer-reviewed secular journals.
Great.
And
And what was it? What were the topics?
one was on related to protein structural biology. It does have some implications for intelligent design. The other one was actually fairly critical of Darwinian evolution. We were able to get published in Springer Nature, which is a respected scientific publisher.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And it was, but we got in a math reference book. No way the evolutionary biologists would have allowed the crew that published to, because there are at least 2 young Earth creationists there, and then the 2 others are probably ID friendly. But we probably got through because the my co-authors were all tenured professors with long careers. I mean, it was just, it'd be a travesty if they didn't,
Mm-hmm.
if my co-authors were rejected. And all we did was cite evolutionary literature because this is a reference work. And I said, the only way we're going to criticize evolutionary theory is to cite the literature that evolutionists themselves have written. We didn't cite any creationist literature on ID, but I thought we made a really good case. So that's probably the biggest development last year. So I did send you a letter about, I don't know if you saw it,
Oh, was it on Gmail? I better check my.
your Gmail account.
I think I
Yeah,
might have missed it. I'll have to go back and look.
because I was asking if you're anywhere near the Bayside Church in Tampa, if that rings any bells.
Bayside. I'm probably, if it's in, is it in Tampa itself or is it Bayside? Well, if it's in Tampa, I'm probably 25 minutes away.
Well, anyway, I sent you the address. It's not that I'm going to be there, but one of my friends is going to be there. But it's a church that's actually a conference church. They don't have a pastor. They just have speakers every week.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I sent you the
Interesting.
details, and I said I'd love to have you on my channel sometime to talk about business and capitalism and socialism.
Yeah. No, I'd love to do that. I love
So
that topic.
maybe I don't have your most up-to-date email then if you have the Gmail account.
No, you do. The problem is I have 2 Gmail accounts, and on them I get a lot, just tons and tons of like extra material that comes from just signing up with stores and those kind of things. So I just get a lot of extra mail that isn't important to me. So sometimes I accidentally hit mark all read when I actually thought that I read all.
Do you want
So
me
I
to
think
send it to you again?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Well, I didn't mean to disrupt your show on Elon Musk.
No. I think I got through the part that I thought was important. I think it's kind of sad. I mean, what do you think about Elon Musk?
I don't follow him at all. I think he's a successful businessman. I'm kind of like ambivalent about electric cars because it really doesn't save the. I mean, you have to burn a lot of fossil fuels to drive a electric car, and so I don't know that that's necessarily the solution. I mean, I've been very interested in green energy for a long time, but until we can actually generate power in a green way, the electric cars, I don't think they necessarily help. Now, I was working for MITRE Corporation, and they split off into MITRE Tech, and the electric cars may or may not be useful in autonomous cars, and I'm not so sure that those things will work.
No,
I mean,
I wouldn't even want one of those, to be honest.
I wouldn't want them on the highway.
No, I don't either.
So I mean, that's about all I have to say about Elon Musk.
Yeah, I don't really, to be honest, I don't really follow him that much, but I kind of do because I have to use examples in my classroom of successful entrepreneurs and people like that. And obviously I can't really, I mean, by the metric of finance, You can't say he's not successful. Clearly, he's made a ton of money. But by other metrics, it's interesting because you can see somebody who's so smart in so many fields, worldly fields, but yet he's over here kind of laughing because he has zero understanding of what Christianity is. And he's the blood and this and that. And they're joking around. And I'm thinking, you can be like a child on one level and like just the worldly knowledge is so much higher. It's incredible.
Well, it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, not many of us noble, not many of us wise, according to the world standards. And that's just, I guess that's sometimes the way it works. Now, there was one very successful entrepreneur, Rockefeller, the patriarch Rockefeller. There is a lot about his Christianity that was very moving to me.
I didn't know that.
Oh, really? Well, then I'm glad I shared it.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that he was I always thought that was actually, I just assumed that he wasn't a Christian. I guess I should have looked back.
Oh my goodness. The great robber barons like J.P. Morgan and Carnegie, and they classed Rockefeller, but they said Rockefeller was just really different because he treated everyone so fairly. Even when he was doing all these hostile takeovers, he tried not to utterly obliterate. I mean, he had the power to just crush them, but it violated his Christian principles. I mean, that being said, some of his enemies did say a lot of things that probably overhyped him as being a villain. And, business can be rough, and sometimes you do play hard, but he tried to be historians have said by the standards of robber barons, he really was fairly saintly. And it was amazing that he was talking about his, Carnegie would always send him a bottle of whiskey to kind of taunt him because he didn't drink. Rockefeller didn't drink. And so maybe I'll find out that article on his Christian faith. He even served as a janitor in his church for a while, which is just
really
amazing, and taught Sunday school. So I was very moved by that. And then kind of Wall Street, I was surprised because I do trade securities, that Wall Street always shuts down on Good Friday. And I looked up the history of that. And that's also very amazing that that tradition began because the Catholics on Wall Street, who were traders, they're going through a rough time. It was before the Great Depression, and they started going back to church. And as their finances recovered, they got very reverent. So that's why the one institution that we equate with just greed and villainy, it actually had very good roots for a season, and they maintain the Good Friday tradition to this day. So I just thought I'd pass because you're interested in business.
That is interesting. And I don't really, I used to be more of an investor than I am now in the stocks. I've got my retirement portfolio, and that's pretty much it. And it just went down $7,000 actually in the last 3 months, which I'm not happy about. But that's the way.
I can understand.
It just goes up and down and up and down. I just hope it just goes up. By the time I decide I'm retiring. So.
Well, I guess the reason I mentioned that is, it's so rare we find people at the top, just like it says in 1 Corinthians, that come to the faith. Either they make their wealth and then come to the faith, or somewhere they're believers and work their way up. And there are not many of those, but it's heartwarming when I do find those stories. So when you're talking about Elon Musk, it's like, well, you never know. I did hear, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, you do find some of those kind of people, because I use those in my classes. I have some of the McGraw-Hill videos that I started using, I don't know, years ago, like over a decade ago. I would find these leaders, like the leader of Container Store, the leader of Zappos, he unfortunately passed away, but Tony Hsieh, he was one I was going after for all of the great things he was doing. He was such a humble person and such a good leader and such a good influence on the community. And he changed around Las Vegas for the better. He got Zappos involved with the community, made it a fun place to work. All kinds of other people have gone over to Zappos to copy his practices. And I look at people like that, and then Patagonia, the leader of Patagonia, the leader of Cirque du Soleil. These are all good people who just gave back, and they're servant leaders. And there's even a female one too at Popeyes. She's not there anymore, but there was a woman who went into Popeyes as a servant leader, and she really promoted servant leadership. And she was able to change around the whole flavor of the company, and they started making money and doing well again because she had the right kind of people who were empowering others and treating people right. And so there are great leaders out there. It's just that sadly, we get in the news, you don't see that much. They don't report on the good stuff. They like to tell you about the creeps.
There was the one of the founders of Primerica Financial. He became a billionaire. The only reason I found out about him was he gave a huge donation to Liberty University some years ago. And so he's another one. I was just trying to, as you were mentioning the other names, I was just trying to look. I couldn't find it, but it is heartwarming to see some believers that are in these advanced fields. And then, you see, it's kind of almost the same, I guess, proportion in kind of the top tier of sciences or any discipline, where the vast majority are not believers, but then you have the few that are respected names and are Christians, and that does mean a lot to me because it's comforting.
Oh yeah, well I'll even give a couple other ones. At my university, in the board of trustees, all the ones that I've met are big Christians in the board of trustees. And these are the people who have very, very deep wallets, and they're affiliated with the university, and they give back in very positive ways, sometimes giving big money to build buildings and things like that. And in our board of trustees, for example, the namesake of not only our school, I'm in the John H. Sykes College of Business, but also of our Ethics Center and of our Center for Faith. And this, a lot of beautiful buildings on campus. This John H. Sykes, big Christian, and there's some other Christians who are also affiliated. I won't name them all, but they're just really great people who just intrinsically want to give back. So I love that.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. So I only, I was just passing by on my channel, and then I saw the alert. So if you could reprise just a little bit of what you're saying like Elon was like, he's very bright at 5 years old. By 9 he dismissed.
Yeah, well, no, I think he might have even dismissed it at 5. But what I'm saying about Elon Musk, and the bottom line I think is, a lot of times we're put in a situation where we're supposed to give nourishment to all of these different dimensions of ourselves. So you want to give nourishment to yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually, and emotionally. So you've got all of these different dimensions. And a lot of times people focus especially on the physical. They're nourishing themselves, sometimes, eating too much or whatever. They're nourishing themselves physically, or maybe even emotionally. They're trying to go into, doing all these things to satisfy their emotions, and maybe trying to keep themselves perpetually happy, maybe with material goods and things like that. But then they don't really focus at all on their spirituality. So you have someone like Elon Musk, who has conquered the world, if you want to call it that. He's sitting on the top of the world with $277 billion in value, I guess, from what the estimate I saw was. And yet he talks about Christianity on the level of a 5-year-old and what his perceptions are when he first got the communion. And I just think to myself, that's so sad, because he has all of this stuff, and when it's all said and done, at the very end of the day, he's going to really value the relationships, because that's all that really matters, that you accumulate. All the money, it doesn't mean anything. Like Ecclesiastes, I love what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes. He said the world, he had hundreds of women, wives. They were leading him away from Christianity. He had done everything. He drank all he could drink. He ate all he could eat. He bought all the things he could ever possibly want. And he realized none of this matters. It doesn't have any sort of meaning. Nothing we do under the sun matters. And then he said, except for God. God is the only one who can give us joy. And so I think that some people maybe never get to that realization like King Solomon did. God did bless him with wisdom. But then there's people, you just, I'm just looking at my own family. I mentioned this, Sal, because I know that you lost your mom last year. My mom is, they're probably going to be bringing her in a home. My dad's probably going to have to bring her in a home in the next couple of weeks. And we've found a place because he just had hernia operations, and he's having a very difficult time lifting her or helping her move around. And she can't really walk on her own anymore, even with a walker. So he had to get a wheelchair. And so we're looking at the options. They have home health care coming now. And so it's one of those things where all I can do, I look back at our life and I just cherish that time. You can't get that back. And you just, you'll have that love and the relationships and all that important stuff. And you realize what else matters, all those relationships, all that stuff that God blessed you with, the family and the friends and the people around you. That's what really matters.
Yeah, and I look at the Old Testament and the conversion stories. Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, some people say they don't believe he's ever converted. I have pastors that have the other view, that he really was humbled and he repented and he humbled himself before God. But sometimes God has to just come into your life and kind of just set you straight, especially when you're at the top like that. It's hard to let go. So that's why, I think that if someone's going to become a Christian and then a successful businessman, it's probably when it'll have to happen like when he's young, or then he faces a crisis with his business or his personal life, and then God does something. So like closer to the modern day, I think of Steve Case, the founder of AOL, and he was a huge donor to our church. And I have a feeling he was a believer most of his life. So yeah, I really think that God's grace has to invade someone's life, and that usually often will involve someone really praying for that person. And like often it's a mother that's just been lamenting over her wayward child, and then suddenly they're hit. Just like our mutual friend John Maddox, he was kind of on top of the world, then he got that
oh yeah,
the bleeding in the brain, and that he said, yeah, the doctors are telling him you should be dead. We don't know why you're just driving around just so calmly. He said, I just feel fine. And then after he got operated on, he said, oh yeah, I did promise God that I lived my life for 10 years. And then to the day I had this, this brain hemorrhage, he said, oh, I think something.
That story is so unbelievable. I mean, it's so incredible because first place, I can't even imagine I think he was around college or something. So, okay, God, here's the deal. I'm going to go live my life exactly how I want to. I'm going to do all the things I want to do.
For 10 years. He set a timetable.
I know, to do that. And then it's almost like I'd be afraid to get to the end of the 10 years because God did remember that promise.
Oh, yeah. And he told me, he said, oh, yeah, the mother and father were believers. Now, the difference with John Maddox, he said he always believed God, but he was in a state of backsliddenness. So, yeah, it is kind of a little bit, it makes me fear and tremble, because that passage in 1 Corinthians, it said God chose the lowly things, the despised, the rejected, to shame the wise, to shame the powerful. And so there will be people, like, as you were saying, that can rise to the top, unless they repent. God's going to use them on Judgment Day to say, hey, I'm flipping everything around. The only reason you were built up was just to kind of make a contrast to the people that were at the bottom that believed in Jesus. And then so that theme is a lot in also, I guess, the Gospels, where they talked about the rich man and Lazarus. And so I guess it does make me fear and tremble a little bit for, because they're businessmen that I've just admired for their genius and cunning and their cleverness and skill. And then I read their biographies and I find they were not believers. And it's like, these are my heroes. And then I'm kind of heartbroken when I realize that they weren't believers. And I'm just like, oh, man. So that's kind of how I would feel about, I'm not saying necessarily Elon Musk, but we know the odds are not favorable to the very wealthy.
You notice something that does happen, though, that you see, and this is really sad, is we just saw that thing with Bob Saget, which is obviously a comedian. A lot of people loved him. He goes out and he performs a comedy show and he dies that night just out of the blue. I'm not sure what, it was, sounds like natural causes from what I understand, but it's you get that kind of story. And you get the stories of these people like I look at Jack Nicklaus, who lived this life. And then now apparently he's in a position kind of similar to my mom with pretty advanced dementia. And he's kind of living out his last days in that kind of situation. And so, you know, if you live long enough, so many people get dementia on one side, or you have, or something happens to you like Bob Saget. And I guess I'm just trying to say that we don't really know our fate. We don't know what hand we've been dealt. And so we have to kind of try to remember to live our best each day. And I was thinking today, I woke up and I thought, what would be the way that I could live today, ideally? Like, what could I do that would make the day ideal? And I thought, okay, I'm gonna exercise. I take my bike ride. I call my dad. Spent probably 40 minutes on the phone with my dad. And I thought, I need to do this every day. You know, I need to really incorporate my dad into my day, because he's really hurting right now. And so it's, you know, and going from, and it's just, and then you think, okay, what could I do at lunch? And I finished all my research stuff to the point where I can't really do anymore right now. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get online and I'll see if maybe there's one thing I can say that puts a little piece of pebble in somebody's shoe, as Greg Kukel would say. So.
Well, you know, and it was so funny. I was thinking, I really like to talk to Stephanie SJ sometime.
Oh, you can call me Stephanie. Most people do.
And there you were. I said, I haven't heard from her. I said, I was wondering if she got my email.
Oh, I'm going to definitely check that out. No, it's so funny because I was sitting in a faculty meeting. This is about a month ago. I'm sitting at the faculty meeting, and this guy who I work with, and I think he might be, I think he might be an atheist, because he's pretty good friends, and he publishes with this guy who is an atheist at my school, and they publish on stuff like secularism and religious stuff. And so out of the blue, the guy comes and sits next to me and goes, "Hey, SJ."
Uh-oh.
I'm like, no one at school calls me SJ. Okay, I'm
so he's been watching your channel. Oh my
That's
goodness.
what he said. He goes, "I've been watching your stuff," and I'm like, "What?" So I was just taken aback. It was so funny. So he might be watching this now. Say hi to him. He knows who he is.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I almost dread the day. I mean, I live in Northern Virginia, and very blue pockets. I mean, I'll walk the neighborhood. You'll see American flags, and then you'll see all these like pro Joe Biden signs in Black Lives Matter, and then, you know, the things that would be indicating someone of the left were drip. So we're very polarized here, and I'm just like, what if my neighbors see what some of the stuff I say? I'm sure I could really offend some of them. And I'm like, I'm on really good terms with them. And you know, I said, what's the best way I could witness? I said, the best way I could witness to them is just to be a great human being to them. If they bring up the subject, you know, I tell them I go to church, and I you know, I thank the Lord for what He's done. And I said, my mom went home to be with the Lord. And that's kind of the most subtle way I could bring it up. I'm not really overt, but they know where I stand on these things. But you know, what if they see this? Especially someone,
Yeah.
you know, and I think one of my neighbors across the street, you know, just across the cul-de-sac from where I live, I think they're Christians, but they're definitely on the left side, and I'm definitely on the extreme right. And I'm like, oh boy, you know, because I definitely have certain views about economics and fiscal policy, and you know, I align a lot on conservative principles.
I'm fiscally extremely conservative. I would definitely call myself, I've always called myself fiscally conservative, even if I tended to lean to the left socially sometimes. I've kind of now moved back. I'm in the center, but I'm definitely to the right fiscally. Like, I do believe in responsibility as far as how we spend our money. And I don't think we're being very responsible right now, or have been since World War II, for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know what, you know, I think it'll take an act of God to change the heart of, well, I think it takes an act of God for practically everyone. And it's just more subtle than we realize.
Well, there's an interesting topic. Do you think we've gone far past the point of rescue? Because think about it, just think about this. Okay, most great empires die at some point. So you've got first you have the Egyptians, and then the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, and the Greeks, and the Roman Empire. All of them fizzle out after a while. And then you have the United States. And at some point, I would say some people think the 1950s was the peak as far as the Camelot era when people were living financially pretty well. There wasn't a big difference between the rich and the poor. The smallest difference than we've had between, say 1900 and now. And so you've got that period of time. Of course, we didn't have good civil rights then, but we were moving towards that at least. But then have we gone too far? Is it God looking at us and saying he's turning his back to us, and maybe there's another place he's warming up to be the next empire?
I hate to be the pundit or the prophet of doom here, but when I was in the defense industry, my heart sunk because of the problem of nuclear proliferation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all we need is, our dear leader in North Korea. If he sets off a nuclear bomb, you don't have to cause a lot of physical damage. When we had the meltdown in 2008, Ben Bernanke and I think Hank Paulson were like, civilization's going to end. And it's like, oh boy, it's like a human body. Many of the organs could be working well, but if you hit the nervous system in just the right spot, you're dead. That's what nerve gas does. And our economies now financially are so integrated. And I think we probably have like a quadrillion in derivatives, way more than all the gross national product of all the countries put together. Because you know how it works with the banking system. It's even worse with the derivatives. And one little hiccup or what little compromise of the information transaction systems and the world could collapse. I don't think, we've become very, very fragile in one sense. We're not, because of the high-speed electronics. So,
and the electrical system, the grid. I mean, I worry about the grid too.
Yeah, when I was in graduate school, I was telling my professor, if we have a certain kind of like a Carrington flare from the sun, it could wipe out our grids, because it happened like in 1859 or so, somewhere in that time frame. But that was there's the telegraph operators were saying we were seeing sparks all over the place, and I'm like, holy smokes, a lot of our devices that are far more low power than that could be easily wiped out. And Congress never passed the law to harden the grid. It would have taken them just not even a few $100 million to do it. And it just, how politics goes. And
well, I wonder why, I look at a place like I was out in Colorado just recently, and they had that big fire that occurred just outside of Denver. And one of the things they think that sparked off the fire were a bunch of electric utilities above ground. And I look around at places like, a wealthy place like Boca Raton, where I'm from, why don't they simply just bury all of these wires that are way up above? I mean, there's no reason for those things to be flinging around. We get these spurns off of hurricanes and tornadoes down here. And up there, obviously in Colorado, I don't know, I forget exactly what they thought caused it, but major winds or something.
Yeah,
but anyway,
yeah.
But why aren't these things, I mean, why don't our governments invest some money in burying that stuff? It doesn't need to be above ground. It's ridiculous. I see it all over the country, this above ground wiring.
That. Yeah, near where I live, we don't see, I hardly see any above ground power lines, which is kind of
like where I live too.
Pleasing. Yeah, it's pleasing to the eye not to see them, because they look kind of ugly.
Oh, they look terrible. And I can even think of, I mean, my mother-in-law and my parent, well, let me think where my parents are. My parents are in a place in Boca that does not have any above ground, like in their neighborhood. My mother-in-law is in one of the older one that's a little further east, and all behind her house, all the way. I mean, these houses are now valued at $800,000 plus, and there are all these above wire electrical things all over the place. And it's just, you've got the people have the tax base, they've got the money coming in there. It's like, fix it. What are you doing?
Yeah, it ends up going to
schools.
Yeah,
they do put a lot of money in the schools down there, but and the fire stations. A really, really beautiful fire station with marble floors, and the courthouse.
So we're talking about civilization now. Michael Brown was saying, because we're having discussion. I follow my eschatology matches his.
Dr. Michael Brown, I love his stuff.
He is a classical premillennialist, and so the what they call the dispensational premillennialists that believe that we're at any moment we could just all, the Christians will just disappear from the earth. They'll be raptured up into heaven.
Yeah, I have not figured that out. Like, I don't know what my
I don't
stance
believe
is.
that. I don't believe that, by the way.
But I just don't understand what my stance, like, I don't know my stance, because I feel like Revelation is so
Right.
unclear to me.
But the only reason I brought that up, he said a lot of Christians are just doom and gloom. And he said, I'm not discounting the fact that God could return at any time or whatever. But he said, Christendom, there are far more dark ages than where we are right now. And he said, just don't quit. Because there were a lot of missionaries in China at one time before Mao Zedong took power, and they're expecting that the Lord would return and kind of just take them out of the earth. And they were in for a pretty bad surprise when they weren't
Mao
taken
Zedong
out.
is horrible.
And it kind of destroyed kind of the mission spirit there and destroyed Christianity for those people anyway, because they're so disappointed. They're putting their hopes in something that God didn't promise. And so they sort of gave up on the world. And I have to kind of motivate myself and say, it looks bad, but I'll be accountable to God someday how I use my talents, and however the cards play out, I can take control of, some degree of control over my life and how I live it. And so I don't put it beyond the realm of possibility that people start to come to their senses before great apostasy would happen again. I just don't know. I think the thing that's very disturbing is just like what happened with Jussie Smollett. When it was after he got convicted, there's still people defending it. I'm just like,
why?
Yeah. It's like, and I realized truth doesn't, for some people, it's all about emotion. The truth doesn't matter anymore. It's what makes you feel a certain way. And if the narrative, they'll just absorb the narrative that kind of makes them feel better about themselves, at least in the short term. But then long term, it's just kind of disastrous. So we've definitely seen a degradation of culture, just like the civility, just like all the stuff happening in the airlines, just all the fights happening in the fights.
I know. You see that stuff filmed, is like, what is wrong with these people? I think unfortunately a lot of people are at their wits' end as far as tensions and stress and all that kind of stuff, especially those people who were, say, in the service industry and they lost their jobs for a while, or they left to be safe health-wise. They were afraid of catching COVID, and especially before the vaccines came out and things like that. And so we've had 2 years now of COVID, and the World Economic Forum, from what I understand, and I had a guy on my channel, Miklos Lukas, who's a South American, very, very smart guy, who talks about the Great Reset, about what the World Economic Forum, which is a bunch of wealthy people who want the world to have a one world government, which is what's portended in Revelation.
Yes.
And
yes.
One of the reasons, what they want to do is they want to have centralized control. And one of the things that they would like centralized control over, they thought that the mechanism they could use would be climate change, to get everybody freaked out about climate change around the world. And then they figure out a way to drag in some money towards them so that they can be the czar, the climate czars up there, controlling the world in this way. But now they're using the pandemic, and they're using these lockdowns, especially in Western countries, to generate some level of control. And they think, from what I understand, is some of them have decided to sort of extend out the pandemic as long as possible, even though the Omicron, which I think the Omicron is no more than, as far as I can see from the people that got it in my family just in the past couple of weeks, it is not, if they got symptoms, super minor, not even as serious as a cold. So wow. I have a hard time taking that seriously. I think it's thankfully it's gotten much less serious than it used to be.
Yeah, when it first was announced, I said this is going to be so terrible because of the transmissibility, and I did see the big dip in the on just the day after Thanksgiving Day. The oil markets lost like 15% in one day, which is tremendous. And but then they realized, it's not. I kept hearing reports. It's like, no, we haven't had really any deaths by Omicron for months in certain regions. I'm just like, well, that's
That's good.
fabulous. Now, I did hear something very disturbing to me.
And let me point out, just so people in the audience know, everybody that I mentioned, except for my infant niece, all the people who got the COVID were double vaccinated, and in some cases they had the boosters. Okay, so they were vaccinated. This is not people who, in my family, everyone gets vaccinated. They didn't refuse, except the infant can't get vaccinated. So anyway, I just want to say that really quickly.
Oh yeah, thank you. I've been vaccinated, no boosters, but now I sort of regret I did get vaccinated, and I'll tell you why. By the way, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've had probably 1,000 vaccinations because I had allergies.
Yeah, I get vaccinated all the time. I mean,
so I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm a pro-good vaccine. And there are now some disturbing studies that are saying 90% of the Omicron cases in Denmark are with people that have been vaccinated. And like, so that means
do they give us a percentage though of the overall, like we need to know the percentage of the population that has been vaccinated, and then the percentage who's been vaccinated versus the percentage who haven't, who've got Omicron. Did they give out, because you can make statistics look however you want if you fiddle around with it enough.
Yeah, and I'm not a medical statistician, but people are, I mean, the experts in the know have said that this is very troubling. And one of them said, actually, what has happened is that's the result of the vaccine not being as effective. It actually did something to the virus, natural selection on the virus, or it actually compromised their immune system to be able to deal with Omicron. And they called it like the antigen original sin or something. And I only saw that yesterday, but there's a woman in my church. She got double vaccinated. She got vaccinated, and she's gotten Omicron. And oh
yeah, so my sister, my brother, my nephew, I could go on. We are all in Colorado, and they had a big, huge boom of Omicron out there in Breckenridge, and they started closing down the town, saying you had to have masks, all this stuff while we're out there, and so we didn't have a chance.
Wow. So you also have, that's anecdotal evidence that people that got vaccinated and boosted can still contract it. And they're saying, well, maybe it lessened the symptoms. I'm like, unless you have a control, you really don't know that. So just take it for, kind of the raw data I threw out. It did jump at me. I said 90% of the reported cases, these people are vaccinated. So I'm like, well, that's, I would have, let me just put it this way. If people are getting into the hospitals or seeing their doctors, and the 90% that got Omicron were the non-vaccinated, then I'm like, that would be kind of what I would have expected, but not this reverse.
Well, it depends. It depends. So for example, say you have, well, here's what it depends on. If the population, if a significant portion of say you've got 90% of the population that's been vaccinated, and 90% of the cases show up to the hospital with Omicron, you have to take the full, like you need to know the whole picture. So for example, if you've got 100 people and 5 people show up who have Omicron, and you look at, and 95 people do not test positive for Omicron, and then you look at what were the percentage of the 5 people with Omicron, like you need to know, you know what I mean? You need to get all of that information on the table just to make sure we're getting the full.
You're very smart. That didn't occur to me. You're really, that's pretty sharp, SJ. So I didn't even realize to think that. So yes, that's a more balanced view.
Well, because I look at how they could, my big thing is, because I try to teach on my classes, how are they going to scam the numbers? Like, how can you make, I took 6 statistics classes at the PhD level. This is my, like, I love studying that stuff, but you look at how people can scam you using statistics. When they talk about the United States has the highest percentage, no, it said the highest number of cases in the world. Well, yeah, you have to do it as a function of the size of the population. So if you say we have the highest number, we have 331 million people, and you're comparing us to 5 million people, or say 2 million in Norway who have it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So you have to, you know what I'm saying? It has to be a function of the population size.
So that would be interesting. So, not that I'm only concerned kind of for my own health benefit, but I am concerned about the mandates themselves, because there are people that have had like COVID and and then they're being forced to take the vaccine. I'm just like, I don't feel good about that. I mean, what's the point? And they were doing that even when the supply of the vaccine was very low. I said, why were the first people to be vaccinated the one that already survived COVID well? And yet the elderly and the really at-risk populations. And so I said some of this, as you were saying, they're trying to stretch the pandemic out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an evidence of like, okay, this was, when I saw that, I said, this isn't really about taking care of people's health. There's an agenda here that doesn't feel very wholesome. And
I agree with you. And isn't it sad that any of this stuff is kind of wrapped into politics rather than just talking about pure
science
health interests and science?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
unfortunately, people are taking positions based on their political affiliations sometimes, and they listen to the news and they say, oh, Rand Paul said this, and my dad got on the phone with me. My dad is definitely a Democrat. He's not a Republican. And he got on the phone today. I was talking to him and he's like, you must agree with what Rand Paul said about the vaccine. And I said, I like what Rand Paul says about Venezuela and socialism. And I read his book and I thought it was really fantastic. But as far as the vaccine, I feel like I do think that probably the effects of the disease are better if you had the vaccine. Like, you're not going to have as serious of a case from what I saw on there. But then Rand Paul said, if you've got Omicron, you have a better chance of, or if you've been vaccinated, you have a better chance of getting Omicron. And that, if he has proof of that, that doesn't seem pretty, it seems pretty disturbing.
Well, then that goes into what you just said about the statistics. You have to have the broader sample size to evaluate that. And that didn't occur to me. So you're really sharp. I'm impressed.
No, I'm not. I was just thinking about, because I always think about how well, let me just mention, I have a friend who works over at American Express, and he's in fraud detention. And he's really, really good at that, because he can get inside the mind of a thief and figure out how they try to scam the system. And so anytime I get information on the news, I think to myself, now, how could they have taken a number and twisted it to make it look like they want it to look instead of how it really looks?
Well, I mean, let me just say this. I hope there can be good vaccines. Now, I heard someone saying Omicron's starting to become like the common cold as far as a virus. And I'm like, well, we've been trying to cure that for a real long time. The common cold, because it's, I guess. Don't you
remember back in March of 2020 when we were going to lockdown, and I thought foolishly that this is going to be like a 2 to 3 week deal. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, but way back in 1918 when they had that Spanish flu, I saw it lasted 2 years, but I thought, oh, but they didn't have the technology we have. We're just going to wipe this thing out in a couple of weeks. And then it just kept dragging on and on. And now the Chicago schools are closing. These kids can't go to school. I mean, it's just my kids are going to school, thankfully. So after my son, he was diagnosed with COVID, but he went through the quarantine period and now he's back in school. And so.
Well, I could say, praise the Lord, that it seems the children are generally not affected to the point of death, unless there's, any special, unless they had a prior condition. So the thing that was very telling, and you're talking about extending the lockdowns, the president of one teachers union somewhere, I got to credit the investigative reporter who dug this up. They caught him taking his kid to private school.
I saw that in California.
Yeah.
Yes. Here he's like, oh, you can't go to school. And there he is shoveling his kid to school. It's such a hypocrite.
Exactly. And then, because we had that talk on experiential education, and, I've been following the whole thing about education. And the one thing that came up, I looked at the statistics. What percentage of public school teachers send their kids to private school? And it's larger than the general population. And someone said, yeah, because they know what really goes on.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
yeah.
Good.
I guess the reason I follow the statistics is I've been very disappointed with what's happening in some public schools. There's some very good ones, and then some, like, it's kind of scary what's going on.
Some are really, I would say, like, I'd be concerned if I had and normally I would say that the Virginia public school system, Virginia has always been at the pinnacle of education as far as I've been able to see. I always thought it was at the highest levels in so many ways. But some of the stuff coming out of Virginia these days seems kind of questionable. And I look at what my kids get, because I ask my kids always, I'm like, can you tell me about your teachers? I want to hear what your teachers say in class. Like, what do they bring up? What do they talk about? And I love the fact that, I mean, my one son had an atheist teacher who admitted he's an atheist. He talked about it. He was very open about it in middle school. And then my other son had this very Christian teacher who was a former police officer who had all kinds of very interesting stories from a Christian perspective and a police officer's perspective. And I like that where we are in Florida, we're kind of in this, originally I was very blue and I thought I don't really fit in here. I'm a blue in a red state, in a red portion of a red state, but I kind of like what they're getting here because they get the influence of these teachers who come from, you see both sides pretty fairly, I think. So.
And that's remarkable because I was on a show, the Non Sequitur show, and we were talking about how, especially I'm a young earth creationist. I know that you and the others aren't, but I was saying the important thing is there's a point you have to let at some point in the child's life to hear the other side. If you're trying to, not just young earth creationism, but Christianity in general. I said, you can't isolate them
forever. You can't cloister people.
And I haven't, because I never thought about it, but what age do you start to expose them to other ideas? Because someone said, would you rather that your children are exposed to this when you're at least there to talk to them, rather than when they go to college and they're just shocked, like they've never been exposed to these other ideas and have never met people with such different viewpoints. So how what do you think about that? When at what point do you start to, if you I don't know how old it is when you became recommitted your life, but I was just curious.
Yeah, I think, see, my parents definitely kind of lean a little bit more. I was raised as a Republican, actually, to be honest. I was raised a Republican, a big fan of Reagan. My family loved Reagan. My family's grandparents, everybody was a big fan of him way back when. And then we kind of all gravitated, not all of us, not the grandparents, but my parents gravitated towards Clinton, and I gravitated towards Clinton. And we started off on that little angle after George W. Bush was in office, George H.W. Bush, I guess. And so then, but then the thing was, then what happened was I kind of kept going down that left-leaning side. And I'm glad that I experienced all that stuff, and I'm glad I was open to it. But I think that it's really important that you, like my kids, they've been exposed to Christianity. They have a foundation. I've given them a couple of books and other things that I want to make sure that gets built on. They've accepted Jesus in their hearts. They've done all that kind of stuff. One wears a cross all the time. He's very much of a believer. The other one's got all little crosses in his room, and he's got a really nice little spot set up. And so I know they have this little foundation, but I know they're going to encounter some troubles in college. So I tell them up front, like, you're going to meet these people. And so my kids are funny because sometimes they'll actually go and watch my YouTube channels while I'm live, and they won't tell me they're watching. And then I'll come downstairs and they're like, you were talking to an atheist.
Wow. Sister, how old are your sons?
15 and 17.
Okay. Yeah. I would, I guess the question is how young, but I think by high school, definitely they're going to start.
Yeah. Middle school, it was about when I started 6th grade, 7th grade, I started talking about other people's positions and other sides and what the arguments would be that they're going to see. And so people are going to talk about this. You're going to go to college, especially not in college as a business, but when you get into the liberal arts, the undergrad, the baccalaureate studies, they're going to encounter those professors who are going to have the atheist view. There's lots of agnostics and atheists, especially in the arts and letters and the sciences. And so,
yeah. And it's not so much that, because I've had almost an atheist mentality, very skeptical. I mean, I nearly left the faith, but in a sense, being in the engineering and sciences, you don't invoke deities a lot in your everyday work. You're just by the numbers. This is what counts. And and what made it hard for me to come back into the faith is the fact that we put our our trust in things we can test and control and understand. And being able to control things, it makes you feel just like, okay, I can test this, I can have confidence. It's like a light switch. I can have faith this is going to work, unless the light bulb is blown out or something like that. Whereas trusting yourself into God's hands, it's like, no, I can't really tell him I can't turn him on and off like a light switch. It's kind of the reverse, and that was very difficult. So I'm fine with, I can deal with that sort of mentality, that sort of atheist or agnostic. It's the postmodern variety that are very unsettling, where truth doesn't matter, and they have questions about. You can just, words don't really have meaning. It's however you respond to it, and so Jordan Peterson kind of represents, he's very close to Christianity, but even in his early years when he's not quite as close as he is now, he was saying, what's the absurdity of this going on? He said, okay, if someone tells you that if you take a sledgehammer and hit your head, it's going to hurt, that has meaning and you can test it. That's how you know that it's true.
Oh yeah.
Words. And he said, this whole postmodernism, it's like, whatever it means to you. It's like, no, that doesn't work. And
well, they make self-refuting statements. They said there is no truth. That's an absolute statement. So you just made an absolute statement. There is no truth. Is that the truth? So you refuted yourself. They don't make any sense. I mean, they run themselves ragged and ridiculous. My biggest problem isn't so much the postmodernists, because I feel like they're trapped in the universities in a lot of cases, and they're dispensing their ideas, and anyone with a half a head is going to be able to look through that and say, oh, please, it's so ridiculous. The bigger problem to me are the people who are trying to push hugely socialist agendas on us. I think if you want, I'll just get to the extreme example, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who I think is, she's a bartender, doesn't belong in, anyway, I'm not trying to disparage bartenders. There's nothing wrong with that, but she doesn't get it. And she uses modern monetary theory, thinking you can borrow from Peter to pay for Paul. You can borrow from one credit card to pay for another credit card. We can spend $93 trillion over the next 10 years to get rid of our airline system and redo all of the infrastructure in the United States. And there's going to be this big czar at the top of the government taking care of all of us. That's what communists sell. It's absurd. And if we put ourselves in that much debt, we're already $27 trillion. No, what are we, 29? No, 31 trillion. I haven't even looked lately. But we have $4 trillion coming in every year. This is the balancing of the budget. $4 trillion coming in taxes. We pay out about $4 trillion if we're lucky, if we balance the budget. Usually we pay out more and then we run up the debt. So the debt last I checked was about $29 trillion. So it's kind of like living on $40,000 and you've got $290,000 in debt, and you never do anything to address the debt. You just keep growing it.
And the scary thing is that's the federal deficit. There's been very big concern. They said, look at the municipalities and states, because they have these unfunded liabilities where you have to be paying for pensions, like in California. And we're looking, I saw the numbers there, and those are pretty scary too. In California, at least the last I heard, like say this would be like 5-10 years ago, their economy is bigger than some European countries, just because they're such a big state. And
well, they're bigger than Canada. Hey, Kip, they're bigger than Canada.
So, some people were saying, Californians there was a proposition to get California removed from the union. And some people say, oh, what a dream. That would be great, because we don't have to worry about their liabilities spreading to the states. And then, now there's this exodus from California into Texas. And I'm just, oh boy, I hope they have more fiscal sense. So
I want to make a quick comment to Kip. Kip said, I kind of like business educators pretending to know things about biblical scholarship. I don't pretend to know. I mean, I read biblical scholarship, I read the Bible, but my big claim isn't knowing more about Jesus. And so how about agnostics or atheists trying to pretend that they know anything about Jesus? Maybe we could compare that way.
I have to say, sometimes the outsider might have a common sense perspective, honestly. than the academics. I mean, that's what ends up that's why you have some of the academia where they're just kind of in their cloistered circle, and they can just reaffirm each other. And it takes the little boy to come and say the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing where they started, like Wellhausen and Doom, and I won't go into that so much, but all these people in the 17th and 18th and 19th century starting to posit that the Old Testament, there's no possible way that these prophecies could have happened. Therefore, there must be multiple authors, and they must have gone down a line and kept inserting biblical text into the book as if nobody noticed over hundreds of years, as if the Jewish people are going to say, "Oh, you've got another chapter you want to add here to Isaiah? Feel free, yeah, bring it on." Sure, he wrote that then, but let's keep adding chapters for the next few hundred years. No, that's not what they did. It's ridiculous to think so. Every early attribution to the book of Isaiah says Isaiah authored it. There's nobody in ancient times who claimed that other people were co-authoring or adding on a bunch of stuff, redacting through centuries. I mean, that to me is completely illogical. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm sorry I jumped on a soapbox, but.
Oh, no. I mean, I just thought I'm not a Bible scholar, but one thing, I mean, just from my own researches in the sciences, it's like I've seen how bad paradigms can just be thrust. I mean, we especially see it now in academia with what's going on. That ideas can just be perpetuated, and I was thinking, okay, so I don't have as many facts in hand as I would like. But when I was younger, I said, I made a certain commitment to a path of life for Christianity. And what ends up happening is, if you persist and the Lord prospers your way, you begin to say, okay, I accepted this as a little child, and then he'll reward. And I've seen in the last 40 years, because I'm nearly, even when I accepted Christ, I was always full of doubts. I was always a doubting Thomas. But then I start to, like the discovery of Nehemiah's wall in Israel. At the time, like in the 80s when I accepted the Lord, it's like, I just accepted by faith the book of Nehemiah. And then they discovered his wall. I said, that kind of raises my feeling of the credibility of the Old Testament. And, these little, sometimes these kind of books that are not as probably glamorous as Isaiah, I'm just like, wow, that kind of raised my faith. And then this or that. And then like, even something like Genesis, the age of the patriarchs, because I worked for a geneticist, world famous geneticist. And Jacob was before Pharaoh, and he said, Pharaoh asked him how old he was, and he said, and Jacob responded, I'm this old, but my ancestors lived much longer. And I was like, well, then how literally do we take kind of the ages of the patriarchs, even if you allowed a little bit of some figurative interpretation? I can't deny that Jacob was saying, my ancestors lived longer. Mm-hmm. And now that I've been studying the genes and listening to other geneticists who are downright atheists and have nothing wanting to do with the Bible, they're all saying that we're degenerating genetically. Almost all the credible ones. I don't know anyone that's of any high repute that's saying we're improving.
That's interesting. Because in theory of survival of the fittest, we would be improving, right?
Well, it's more subtle than that. It's survival of the fittest among siblings. But if the parent's the most healthy and the parent passes, a couple passes on 100 new mutations to each kid, in a sense, yeah, the survival of the fittest among the siblings, if you take if you hypothetically kill off the worst siblings, the remaining sibling's still sicker than the parent. And so it's more subtle than, when they say survival of the fittest, there are cases where that will fail, because really the parents, the prior generation being actually the true fittest, well, they weren't able to pass their fittest genes to the kids and we're in a situation, the geneticists are saying, we have 100 mutations per generation per kid. Each child, every generation has 100 more than the parent. And they're like, what are we going to do with this? And so as this data came out, and the medical researchers were reporting it, and then concurrently they were saying, we think a lot of the genome is functional, the evolutionary biologists were livid, because they said if the studies, they said if ENCODE is right, evolution is wrong. And ENCODE was a big NIH study that was studying the genome. And I was kind of in the thick of that as far as my professional work, reporting on it. And so it's like, okay, something that looked so embarrassing to me when I was a teenager reading the Bible, and atheists would confront me, said, there's no evidence we could have lived that long. That's just ridiculous. And then now it's like, oh, we are degenerating. That means we're healthier, we're smarter. We see the bones of, like, the anthropologists have, like the bones in burial sites. They're bigger. We were like CrossFit. The average person was like elite CrossFit athlete. The cranial capacity was bigger. And I'm like, these are all indicators.
Let me just ask you that, because I going back to Jesus' time, it's my understanding that people were much shorter in stature than they are today.
That's very possible. So
okay. I didn't know if that fit in.
But the relative, the size of the cranium relative to their body was bigger. But I think the point, I may be getting some of the particulars not quite right, but all the geneticists I've been listening to who track human heritable diseases, they're saying, yeah, we don't know, we're going into a crisis. Now they'll attribute it to modern medicine, but we've actually been on this decline for quite a long time, for thousands of years. So
I can say just logically looking at our diets versus ancient diets, and they talk about, say, the Mediterranean diet, and obviously there was some feast and famine, and that clearly is not healthy. But in the cases where they had been cultivating their own crops and doing things like that, and people were walking 15, St. Paul, they said, walked 15 to 30 miles a day, going from place to place. People just did really healthy things back then. And you look at today, and some people are very healthy today, but our population in the United States, what are we? 65% of people are obese or overweight, and then 30% are obese. We're just not healthy. We're not eating right. We've got all these processed foods and terrible stuff going on.
Yeah, so we have things that are non-genetic that are affecting our health, but the concern that, it really is kind of depressing. And I shared this with people. I said, Jesus said, this earth is passing away, and there are geneticists that are saying we don't expect humanity to last very long relative to geological timescales. Like I saw one by Brian Sykes saying 100,000 years, and some even saying, yeah, we're going to have serious decline in human health in just 200.
I think if we keep up the eating that we, all the white sugar and the flour and all that kind of stuff that people are loading up their diets with, it's awful.
Well,
and I'm guilty of, I eat processed food.
Well, where I was headed with that is, see, all this was 40 years ago. They were just mocking the Christians for, like, what do you do with that? And I'm like, okay, so just in my lifetime, I've seen the discovery of Nehemiah's wall. I've seen at least some evidence that makes me more believe that we had people that lived those long ages. When you read, like Abraham and his ancestors, I like that. That sounds very believable now. And so, as you were saying, in the 18th and 19th century, they're thinking that this wasn't real. And then we find the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So, I love that. It's like what Jesus said. If they don't call out, the stones will cry out. And every time that, like, they were positing there's no Belshazzar, suddenly they get the Nabonidus cylinder. You've got the Cyrus cylinder. You've got all of these things that keep popping up out of the ground. And like David Falk said, I've had him on my channel. He said, with every turn of the shovel, someone's theory is overturned.
Exactly. And
it's hilarious.
I don't see that trend disappearing. And
no, it's getting if you look at, like, the Archaeological Society and look at the stuff that's coming out of Jerusalem and those papers and stuff, they're constantly digging up things that are supporting it. They just had, what was it? I'm going to forget. Was it Isaiah? Yeah, it was Isaiah. There was some sort of little, like, like cufflink or something that had Isaiah's name on it, and it had one of the, I want to say Hezekiah's name. These little things that were found just really recently that, again, giving us more support for the historicity of those books.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think I'm kind of excited for where it's going to go. So so people ask us like, well, okay, I just have faith as a little child. Sometimes we make, all of us are confronted with decisions in life. All of us are confronted with decisions in life where we don't have as many facts as we'd like. I mean, people make commitments like people deciding to get married or signing big contracts or whatever. It's like, okay, faith is a part of your life, whether you want it to be or not, because
you have faith in something.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I can't.
It's just like you're saying, like you get married and you're trusting that, hey, right now we're in very good health, everything's great. You don't know how it's going to be in 20 years and the situation. And so you just trust, even if you get in a bad situation, bad health, you trust that it's going to work out. You trusted that 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and you just keep, like I said, my parents together 55 years. I love that. In sickness and in health. Right now, unfortunately, there's a case of sickness. So it's just, it's just how life is.
So, the way I look at it is like, okay, maybe to some of your detractors, your arguments have been persuasive to them, but I will say your arguments have been persuasive to people like me, and especially having seen what's happened even in the last 40 years. And as you said, what happened from the 18th and 19th century and how bad things, for the people that were trying to destroy the faith, if you actually look at the evidence, now it's like it's a lot more credible than it was 300 years ago. I mean, that's why you have people like J. Warner Wallace and others. It's like, and I've said, maybe if I were born 300 years ago on the evidence alone, I think I might have been an atheist, definitely a non-believer. I would have probably had that attitude of Elon Musk, that like, okay, this is just going through the motions in a ceremony. I have no immediate proof that this was anything but fairy tales. But now in the present day, it's like, I couldn't in good conscience run away and say this is all fake. If all I had were the ceremonies, I think I'd probably be in Elon Musk's camp.
Well, that's the, and I want to also say thank you to Taking Back Eden, who's John, for his generous super chat. Thank you. Blessings to you for 2022 too, John. I hope that everything's going well. But I agree with you. I think that, oh, now I lost my train of thought. Darn it.
You're talking about Elon Musk or something.
Yeah, well, Elon, yeah. No, I had something I really wanted to say that had to do with, the idea of extrinsic versus intrinsic religiosity. Because I think that people look at the church in two different ways. You look at it, what can the church do for me? Or that's the extrinsic idea. Or you look at the intrinsic, which is what can I do for God? And, just like say, God, I'm asking you into my heart, work through me today. That's more of an intrinsic belief. And what they found, there's all kinds of positive health outcomes and everything else associated with intrinsic beliefs. But the extrinsic ones, it's like when the going gets rough, the rough get going. It's just like Jesus said when he talked about the pathway and how you can plant some and they're on rocky soil and some are on firmer soil and all that kind of stuff. And it's exactly the same with the extrinsic. And I think Europe, sadly, is populated by too many people who are of the faith extrinsically, and they're just kind of apathetic towards it in some cases, or maybe hostile towards it in others, and they just don't care. And the churches are emptying out and filling up with, they're turning churches into other buildings now, and it's sad. Other purpose buildings, I should say.
Well, this is interesting that because I've been thinking about, we're seeing the decline in churches here, but in some respects it never surprised me, because they never the church culture I'd been growing up in, I started as Catholic then Protestant, it was very much argument by assertion. And so that's why I have kind of a lot of sympathy for atheists of a certain variety. Not the anti-theists, but the atheists who are like, I had looked at church, I'm still open, but I'm just not convinced. And I'm like, yeah, I've been there, done that. Because there are a lot of
look, and they don't answer, like Elon Musk said.
Yeah, and so I nearly left the church because when I started to ask tough questions, they started to resent me. Of course, then I went to the other side and they treated me the same way. When I started to ask hard questions of them, they were all fine when I was like questioning Christianity. But once I started to question their viewpoints, sometimes that's when I got the pushback.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like, well, how do you find meaning? Where do you have purpose? And then I just start, to just keep, what about science? What do you think about life? Don't you see the complexity? And they began to become increasingly hostile. And so I said, okay, there's a lot of faith that's just driven not by facts at all on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it doesn't surprise me that the church in the United States and in Europe has been in decline, because it was driven by kind of the culture. Social groups are very, very powerful. And there's a guy in a church, my former church. He was he used to hang out with the Hells Angels, and he said, yeah, when they have their big meetings, they call it church. And I said, there's something about kind of the brotherhood or these social groups that people will just kind of persist because it's a nice club. And a poll was recently taken about why people are in church, and it's like only 10-15% said it's because they want to be right with God. The others had a variety of reasons, which was, I'm like, actually, I think that poll's pretty accurate.
Yeah, I believe it is. And there are some churches that are booming in the United, like my church, Fishhawk Fellowship, is booming in our area. That's a Baptist church, but so is the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church just bought a brand new building. It's gigantic, and the place is completely filled every Sunday. Like the cars are all over the place. And so there are places that are booming. It really kind of depends on where you are in the United States.
Yeah. My church has had just imploded recently, but there are all sorts of scandals involved. But I was just looking at that, and I said, Christianity now is actually equipped. If they want to prosecute, so to speak, the case for Christianity, they have better tools than they did when I first became a Christian about 43 years ago. And so I'm kind of hopeful that there's a glimmer of hope. We talked about, a gloom and doom scenario, but if we're able to break kind of the barriers of academia and kind of the culture, we do have a lot of facts on our hands.
And I think, thank you for bringing, I do want to point something out that I think is important, because one of the things that I feel as a college professor is when people talk about universities, a lot of times they give us one broad sweep, as if all of the different schools and universities have the same kind of professors coming out of them. And I mean, they act as if, you see it at Fox News, you see it on CNN, you see it in these places where they'll talk about the liberal professors as if, 99.9% of the professors in universities are liberal. And that, quite frankly, isn't true. If you go, especially in colleges of business, where we're all about free markets, you're just not going to find these people who are endorsing socialist policies. It's the rare professor in a business school who's got any sort of socialist leanings. I can name a few socialists in my school, and they're not even really real socialists. They totally believe in free markets. They just like the idea of universal health care, if you want to call that leaning a little bit more to the left. But the ones who are endorsing the crazy postmodernists, you don't find postmodernists in business schools. Number one.
Praise God.
You won't. I no. No. You would not even get published. That kind of stuff, I had to dig to find that outside of my field, anything in postmodernism, because people might touch on it or bring it up every once in a blue moon, but it really is not something that informs people's thoughts on what's going on in business. Is what motivates people, what incentivizes them, economic policies. It's just not serious stuff to us. And so, but I think that needs to be known. I think parents, if you're sending your kids to school, make sure they have a major that's going to make them money when they graduate, that they can afford themselves. I hate to say it that way, that they can afford to live, like they can pay their bills, and they don't have to worry about trying to get a job that takes advantage of their major.
And actually, that ties to one of your points that when you were saying that one of the big dangers to society is the increasing socialism, because the free markets, just in talking to you just right now, I'm realizing individuals like yourself, business leaders, that's where Christianity has a good chance of flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
Where thoughts are free, and it's important to know the truth rather than be indoctrinated to something that's, a dogma that's unsupported. So it's free markets and free speech, free flow of information,
Mm-hmm.
and so
And well, just to piggyback on that, if we go back to the early church, I've had a lot of people say, well, Jesus was a socialist because in the early church, a lot of them gave all they had into the group and they would fund things. But that's not how it worked. What happened was Paul made sure that everybody was working. Paul said, if you're not going to work, you're not going to eat. He made it really clear that you're not supposed to be, unless you can't work, you're disabled or something like that. But in the cases where you can work, you're expected to work. And you were of your own heart, you're giving to the cause. You're not forced to give to the cause. Although if you lied, and like what was the couple that did that? They said they sold a certain amount of money and they lied about it. If they would have just said, we're just going to give half of our money that we just made to the cause, there wouldn't have been a problem. But they decided they're going to lie and say, this is everything. And so that was the problem. But it's your own volition. You decide if you're going to give money. It's not being forced. The government's forcing your hand and saying, we need you to give 40% of everything you made.
I never thought of that passage to be in favor of capitalism, but come to think of it, as you said.
Yeah, Paul was busy making tents.
That was pretty.
And Aquila were making tents. They were doing stuff during the week so they could afford themselves.
I never. Boy, you have a way of sometimes looking at scriptures in a way I never would have thought, especially given your business. I never even thought of that passage to be a justification for free markets. And there was the passage where the better teacher is worthy of double honor. And that's like, okay, so you give, so you pay, or you either give, and by way of extension, you pay more for something when you get a better product.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very free market type viewpoint. And on Jordan Peterson's, his 11th chapter in the 12 Rules of Life, he was saying, okay, say you're in a socialist country, aren't you going to go to the very best doctor if you have, like, say you have a loved one that's sick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, even my biggest passage for capitalism in the Bible is, and I'm not saying capitalism is perfect, because unfortunately we do have greedy people who don't give back as they should be, and not to be forced to give back, but they're like, you see Bill Gates, he has this Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's wonderful. He's trying to help Africa and help people, healthcare and all that. Then you've got Warren Buffett giving 83% of his income to Bill Gates's cause. Great. He did that on his own volition. He decided to do that. But the thing is, if you look at the parable of the talents, I think that's the biggest tell, because it explains why some people have more natural talent than others, right? So he gives one person 10 talents, 1 5 and 1 2, or maybe it was 10 5 and 2. The one, whatever the percentage was, the one with 10 doubled his money, the one with 5 doubled his, based on what they were given. So some people don't have as many talents as others, but they're still going to work hard with what they have. And then there was the one with the 2 who just buried him in the ground. That's your socialist. and he buried him in the ground, and then he decided that he was going to run the country like Stalin.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the reason I like Jordan Peterson is he was able to kind of arrive at that from kind of an independent viewpoint than traditional Christianity. He's reading about what happened in the gulags of Russia.
That's horrible, yeah.
And I never made that connection. And he was saying, he said one person he was a clinical psychologist, and it was one of his clients, actually, one of his patients, who told him about the Pareto curve. Have you heard?
Yeah, 80-20.
Yeah, and he said, it's just natural we're going to have these competence hierarchies, And when you try to destroy that, it'll cause disruption.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
It's true. I mean, some people, you look at somebody like Michael Jordan. Here's a guy who's born with tremendous, natural talent. Or who's the Tom Brady. Tom Brady. Holy cow! This amazing talent these people have. Obviously, so many people are never going to get to that. But if they go out and they do the best they can do, which is what God wants them to do, maximize it however you can. But once you do that, once you get to the top, now it's time to also take care of those, each one teach one, help out those under you. And so that's sort of what, like Denzel Washington talks about that. I love Denzel Washington. It says to each one teach one.
So, and I realized, I said, if they're going to try to force, equal outcomes, I said, that means you're confiscating people's property and redistributing it. And
that's what they did.
And this invites, and then what Jordan Peterson said, okay, who decides how to distribute things equally? Who's going to decide? And he said, that's the real issue. And then, of course, you end up having tyrants saying that they're going to equalize things, and they don't. They keep it all for themselves, because when they have that much power to be able to confiscate people's property, that's why you have like a Venezuela and all these tyrannical economies. So, by the way, I heard your talk on Venezuela. And Hugo Chavez. I just like, I wish I could listen to you for hours talk about this, and just like, it's so sensible. And I've only been starting to learn this over the last. I mean, I've always been fiscally conservative, but my understanding of why it's a good thing. Sometimes you just adopt a viewpoint and you can't really defend it. You instinctively know. But I was just like, Venezuela is just. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make a bad joke here, but it's like the gift that keeps on giving, in terms of evidence of why socialism fails.
Well, look at Venezuela. There is a tiny pocket of elites in Venezuela. The daughter of Hugo Chavez, he passed away, but the daughter is worth $2 billion. And you've got all these people running around starving, eating their house pets. Okay, they're that desperate that they're eating zoo animals and their house pets. And so it's a terrible situation going on. And the big issue with socialism and this whole idea is in the United States, we give the business people power. And if you run a business and you run it into the ground, you're going to go out of business. But you don't get to keep borrowing money. And sometimes they do borrow money, but eventually you have to kind of, you borrow money, but you have to make up for it and start making profits. And if you don't do well, you got a business. But in government, if they don't do well, they just tax the people more. So the government has power, but it's unchecked compared to how it would be if just letting business people get some sort of power, letting the little guy. In our country, 89% of companies have less than 500. 89% have less than 500 employees. And I'm forgetting the numbers right now. I got to go back and get that. But a very significant portion of people in the United States are working for smaller companies. And actually, it's 89% of less than 20 employees, fewer than 20 employees.
And with small businesses getting wiped out, that's very, I know. It's very disheartening. And so it is beautiful I can't tell you how heartening it is to hear you say these things, because I'm seeing kind of a trend in seminaries and in the pulpits. It's very very socialist leaning, and these people are scholars in the Bible, and they can persuade. They're very persuasive because they're able to use the Bible, and it's not quite. It can be easy to make the case, so let's just equalize all the outcomes and all, but you have to read the Bible carefully. And just like that passage is the Ananias and Sapphira, I'm just like, I never thought of that before.
Yeah, it's equal opportunities is wonderful, and I think that's what America was built on. But equality of outcomes, not so much. You can't. That's like the best way I can explain it to my students, and I do say this to the seniors sometimes. I kind of make fun of communism a little bit in the class. Sorry if you're a communist, but kind of like, here's why communism doesn't work. You guys work as hard as you want to study for this next test, but no matter how hard you work, I'm going to give you guys all C's. And then they're like, and then the next test, after everything gets kind of worn in there, you're all getting D's.
That was pretty sharp. I'll have to remember that.
They don't like communism. It's like the A students, especially. The A students.
Oh,
no.
Wow. I never. That's pretty good. Well, I'm really glad you invited me to talk. I'll send you the email, and if I find the thing on Rockefeller, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, do. Well, thank you. We should do something more often, maybe every couple of months or something coming out. Like I'll go on your channel sometimes and you come on. I would love that.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, if I get snowed in again, because even on my channel, I haven't been on my channel very much, but like the last week there was snow and ice. You probably heard about the backup on I-95. I'm walking.
Yes. Are you near that?
Yeah, I'm walking distance, almost walking. It's 3.5 miles. I can walk that far, but yeah.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm not going to go out to work today to drive. And I'm glad I did, because these guys are stuck for 24 hours, 50-mile backup. So this next Monday, they're predicting a snowstorm. I could just email you and say, hey SJ.
Yeah, email me.
Okay. And I'll also email you about that church at Bayside. And
definitely,
I don't know, you might be able to see one of my Christian friends there. He'll be speaking on the 23rd of January. So,
very cool.
All right.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in here. Do you want to let anybody know he's Evidence and Reasons? You guys need to go over and subscribe. But are you working on anything or upcoming debates you want to tell them about?
I was on the I'm going to publish. I can rebroadcast some things and also give links. I was on the Non Sequitur channel recently, and
I'll have to go watch that. Was it a debate?
It was about education, and it was more of a discussion, panel discussion. And then I had a talk with an evolutionary biologist. But the funny thing is, now that I've kind of broken the peer-reviewed level paper, the barrier, they're starting to treat me like colleagues, which is like, gee, your university professors or evolutionary biologists are not kind of treating me very friendly, like I'm one of them, and that means a lot to me.
That's awesome.
So I will be continuing to release content on why I think we're miraculously created. So I'm very, even though I'm a young Earth creationist, my roots are really in the ID movement, like with people that believe in universal common ancestry and an old Earth. But the miraculous nature of even what it means to be human, even just on a biological level, it's like when it says in the Psalms, we're fearfully, wonderfully made. I'll be having some of these things on there. And I do have, like if people comb through the material, you'll see stuff where I cover my peer-reviewed papers in biology. And then I have some things that are a little bit lighter. So anything that says nerd, you probably, unless you're a nerd, don't go there because it's very technical. But then I have some more public things. I do have then also some philosophical stuff on like romance and Christianity. I have a series on that. And then a book I'm working on is Cures for Doubting Thomas, which is for people to go through.
You said you were one.
Yes, and I'm a recovering doubting Thomas. I struggle every day because I am in the sciences, and you're like, God, are you really there? And then I study biology, and it builds my faith. And so thank you for giving me a chance to promote my. Oh, by the way, I was voted the #1 YouTube creationist last year. I still hold
really?
It. Yeah,
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's not because of the size of my subscriber base, but that was with university professors and other evolutionist YouTubers saying that they rated my content to be the best. So
congratulations, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. I know nothing about, I'm not going to even pretend I know anything about evolutionary biology. because I don't. I know I have a very junior level understanding. So hearing that stuff from you and from other people, it's just fascinating to me. So appreciate that.
Well, that's all I
Thank you.
had. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Please like and subscribe to Sal's channel too. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Thank you so much.